Quite literally in the last few seconds, the judge handing down his sentence to Sean Diddy Combs, who he has ruled will spend 50 months in prison. So that's just over 4 years in prison for his crimes. Sean Combs has already been in prison for just over a year, so that means he will spend a further 3 years in prison. It's towards the lower end of the potential maximum sentence.
The courtroom fell silent as Sean Diddy Combs wiped away tears, his head lowered, his expression completely shattered. Moments earlier, the judge had just announced a shocking decision. Diddy's prison sentence was being officially increased after the court received what it described as explosive new evidence. The man once hailed as the ultimate music mogul, a symbol of success and power, was suddenly reduced to silence. Disbelief etched across his face. The cameras caught every second of it, and within minutes, clips from the courtroom started spreading like wildfire across social media. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. Diddy, the same man who had always appeared untouchable, was breaking down in real time. He tried to compose himself, but the weight of the new ruling seemed to crush every ounce of confidence he had left. Commentators described it as one of the most emotional moments in recent celebrity legal history. The prosecution had submitted new evidence just days before sentencing. Evidence that, according to sources, completely changed the tone of the case. It wasn't just a small update. It was a game changer. The hearing began calmly enough. Diddy appeared in his usual tailored suit, expression controlled but tense. His lawyer seemed confident, even hopeful that the original sentence might be reconsidered or reduced. But then, in a move that shocked everyone in the courtroom, the prosecution revealed a sealed document marked "Newly Obtained Evidence." No one expected what came next. After a brief recess, the judge returned with a firm expression and announced that, based on the new material, the court was compelled to extend Diddy's sentence. Gasps filled the room. Cameras flashed. And Diddy's world came crashing down. What's even more striking is how quickly things escalated. Until that moment, most believed the worst was behind him, that the legal storm that had consumed his career for months was finally settling. But this twist reignited everything. The judge's words were clear. The new evidence presents a serious development, one that alters the scope of the court's previous decision. That single sentence sent shockwaves through the industry. As Diddy stood there, trying to maintain his composure, reporters in the gallery scrambled to send updates to their editors. Some described the scene as eerily quiet, others said it felt heavy, like everyone in that room understood something historic had just happened. Diddy's hands trembled slightly as he reached for a tissue, his eyes glistening. It was a rare glimpse of raw emotion from a man known for his composure and control. Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted. Fans gathered, shouting in disbelief, while news vans crowded the streets. Within an hour, hashtags like "Justice for Diddy," "New Evidence," and "Courtroom Tears" began trending worldwide. Some people sympathized, calling it a tragic moment for a fallen icon. Others saw it as justice catching up. But no one could deny the impact. The entire world was watching, and the narrative had changed overnight. The exact nature of the new evidence remains unclear, but sources close to the investigation describe it as digital material that connects Diddy to previously unverified allegations. Legal analysts on major news outlets immediately began speculating about what that could mean. Was it communication records? Financial documents? Or something more personal? Something that could reshape how the public sees him entirely? Whatever it was, it had enough weight to convince the court to revisit and extend an already severe sentence. For many, the moment Diddy broke down in court wasn't just about guilt or innocence, it was symbolic. It marked the end of an era. Here was a man who once stood at the top of the entertainment world, now brought to tears by a legal system he could no longer control. Even the prosecution's team, normally stone-faced and reserved, looked uneasy as the reality of the decision settled in. No one expected this outcome. Meanwhile, Diddy's legal team immediately requested a postponement and hinted at an appeal, but the judge denied it, stating that the new findings were too significant to ignore. His attorneys looked devastated. One of them was overheard muttering that the ruling was unprecedented. And it really was. Rarely does a sentence increase after initial judgment unless the new evidence is overwhelming. As the courtroom emptied, Diddy sat motionless for several minutes, staring at the table in front of him. It wasn't the look of anger or defiance that people had seen in previous hearings. It was something deeper, a look of realization, maybe even regret. When he finally stood up, escorted by officers, his face said it all. The empire he'd built, the fame he'd enjoyed, and the control he'd always held were gone. In their place was uncertainty, vulnerability, and a fear the cameras couldn't ignore. Outside, as he was led to the waiting vehicle, someone shouted, "Stay strong, Diddy." He didn't respond. For the first time in decades, he looked small. Not as a celebrity, not as a mogul, but as a man facing the full force of consequence. The crowd fell silent, watching as the car door shut and he disappeared from view. And yet, the biggest question still remains. What was in that new evidence? What was so powerful that it could change everything in a single hearing? As journalists and fans continue to speculate, one thing is certain. This case isn't over. If anything, it's just entering its most dangerous chapter. As the courtroom chaos slowly settled, the focus shifted from Diddy's reaction to the mystery surrounding the new evidence that had changed everything. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, desperate for details. Every outlet claimed to have an exclusive, but none could verify exactly what had been shown to the judge. Inside the walls of the courthouse, secrecy was absolute. No leaks, no hints, just silence. And that silence was deafening. In the hours following the hearing, fragments of information began surfacing online. Anonymous insiders whispered about digital traces, encrypted files, and a set of communications that allegedly connected Diddy to conversations long thought to be erased. Whether these claims were true or just a product of online speculation didn't seem to matter. The story had already taken on a life of its own. The phrase "new evidence" became the spark that reignited a wildfire of curiosity and outrage across the internet. Major news outlets went live with round-the-clock coverage, dissecting every possible angle. Analysts debated how the court could have obtained such evidence so late in the trial, while fans and critics clashed online in an emotional tug-of-war. One side insisted that Diddy was being unfairly targeted, that the timing of this evidence was too convenient, too perfect. The other side argued that justice had finally caught up with him. But behind all the noise, one thing was clear. Something powerful had surfaced, something big enough to shake the entire foundation of the case. Inside the detention facility, Diddy's world had shrunk to the size of a concrete cell. Gone were the designer suits, the entourage, and the flashing cameras. Now there was just silence, punctuated by the occasional echo of footsteps down the hall. Sources close to the prison staff revealed that he had become noticeably withdrawn since the hearing. Barely speaking, barely eating, spending most of his hours staring at the wall or scribbling notes in a small notebook he kept hidden. Some guards described him as haunted, others as broken. Meanwhile, the internet's obsession with the new evidence only deepened. A self-proclaimed whistleblower appeared on an independent news channel, claiming to have seen parts of the material submitted to the court. According to this source, the evidence included a chain of encrypted messages allegedly linking Diddy to individuals already under investigation in a separate case. Whether this was true or not, no one could say, but the story exploded overnight. Hashtags like #DiddyFiles and #EvidenceLeak trended globally. People wanted answers, and the hunger for more details turned into a digital feeding frenzy. Legal analysts began to raise serious questions about the investigation itself. How had this evidence been found so suddenly? Why was it presented at the final stage? And who had authorized its submission? A retired prosecutor appearing on national television described the development as highly unusual, suggesting that it hinted at an ongoing covert investigation running parallel to Diddy's case. That possibility sparked a new wave of theories. Was this just the beginning of something much bigger? In the days that followed, even people close to Diddy started distancing themselves. Longtime associates refused to comment, while former collaborators quietly deleted photos and posts from social media. It was as if the entertainment industry itself was erasing his existence one piece at a time. The man once celebrated for his business empire and charisma had become a ghost, a symbol of how quickly fame could crumble under the weight of accusation and evidence. Journalists began revisiting his past interviews, searching for clues. Old clips of Diddy talking about loyalty, success, and control resurfaced, now viewed through a darker lens. Every word, every gesture was being reinterpreted as foreshadowing. The media storm had transformed him from a celebrity into a cautionary tale. Yet those who had known him personally described a different picture. A man deeply paranoid, increasingly isolated in the months leading up to his arrest. One insider said, he felt it coming. He just didn't know when. Meanwhile, The court maintained complete silence about the contents of the evidence. The judge refused to comment, and the documents remained sealed. That vacuum of information only made public speculation worse. Independent channels released so-called leaked transcripts, most of which were proven fake, but that didn't stop millions from believing them. The story had grown beyond fact. It had become a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of the fall of power. Inside his cell, Diddy reportedly received a visit from his legal team. Witnesses said the meeting lasted over 2 hours and ended with raised voices. The guards nearby claimed they heard him shout something about setting the record straight before the conversation ended abruptly. No one knew what was said after that, but hours later, Diddy requested access to writing materials, possibly to prepare his own statement. Whether that statement would ever reach the public was uncertain. By the end of that week, the case had become more than a legal proceeding. It was a spectacle, a global obsession. Commentators described it as a battle between truth and reputation, between power and exposure. But for those who had followed Diddy's story from the beginning, this wasn't just about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about how quickly a person could go from being untouchable to utterly undone. And as the media demanded answers, one question kept echoing louder than the rest. If this was just the beginning of what the new evidence revealed, what could possibly come next? The world had seen the tears, the courtroom shock, and the whispers about evidence, but now came the hardest part, the aftermath. In the weeks following the judge's ruling, the media obsession reached a fever pitch. Talk shows, podcasts, and late-night hosts dissected every frame of the footage where Diddy, the once untouchable mogul, seemed to crumble. Commentators debated whether they were witnessing justice or tragedy. For many, it wasn't simply a case anymore. It had become a mirror reflecting the darker side of fame itself. Inside the correctional facility, Diddy's world shrank even further. He rarely left his cell except for brief meetings with his legal team. Guards described him as distant but alert, spending hours pacing or writing. Some claimed he was working on a memoir, others said he was preparing a statement that would change the story forever.
Whatever the truth, one thing was undeniable. He was no longer the same man who had walked into that courtroom weeks earlier in a tailored suit.
Something inside him had shifted. Outside those walls, the storm only grew. The so-called new evidence had ignited an arms race among journalists, influencers, and amateur sleuths all trying to uncover the truth. A dozen documentaries were announced within days, each promising exclusive insight. YouTube channels released long investigative videos breaking down the timeline, while podcasts speculated about the people behind the leaks. Every platform wanted a piece of the story, and every new theory fanned the flames higher. But amid all the noise, a quieter narrative began to emerge. Some began questioning whether the evidence that sealed Diddy's fate had been manipulated, or even planted. A former investigator hinted in an interview that the files had passed through multiple hands before reaching the court, raising doubts about their authenticity. The idea that someone powerful might have wanted Diddy silenced began to gain traction. Soon, hashtags shifted from hashtag Justice for Diddy to hashtag Who Framed Diddy. What had once been public condemnation turned into collective suspicion. Meanwhile, Diddy's attorneys filed a motion to review the new evidence, claiming irregularities in the chain of custody. The motion was denied, but the gesture itself sparked renewed interest. If the files truly held the power to increase a sentence, why couldn't they be publicly examined? Why were they sealed so tightly? Legal analysts warned that such secrecy could backfire, especially in a case already saturated with conspiracy theories. The court, however, remained unmoved. The documents stayed locked away, and speculation continued to thrive. Back in the cell block, a shift was happening inside Diddy too. Those close to him described a man grappling not only with the system but with himself. Gone was the defiant celebrity who had once walked red carpets. In his place stood someone haunted by reflection. At night, he reportedly replayed his old interviews on the small television in his cell, staring silently at the younger version of himself who had once believed he could control everything. The irony was painful. The man who had built an empire from sound and image was now trapped in silence. The public narrative began to fracture. Some voices demanded his immediate release, calling the new evidence a setup. Others argued that accountability shouldn't be clouded by fame. What fascinated observers most was how Diddy's story had evolved from scandal to myth. He was no longer just a celebrity in trouble. He had become a symbol of power, downfall, and the dangerous intersection of money, media, and truth. Even his harshest critics admitted that the entire saga exposed how fragile justice could appear when fame was involved. Then, unexpectedly, a letter surfaced. It was handwritten, allegedly from Diddy himself, addressed to the people still watching. The letter, verified by his legal team, wasn't an admission or a denial. It was something else entirely. He wrote about fear, regret, and the cost of building a life around image. He spoke of losing sight of real connections and chasing a version of success that devoured everything in its path. "They took my freedom," he wrote, "but maybe that's what it took for me to see who I really am." The letter spread like wildfire, reframing the public conversation once again. The following week, the judge authorized a limited internal review of the evidence after external auditors raised questions about data authenticity. Though the results were never made public, rumors of discrepancies leaked to the press, reigniting debates and protests outside the courthouse. Supporters held up signs reading "Truth Matters," while detractors accused the movement of rewriting history. The atmosphere felt less like a legal battle now and more like a cultural reckoning. For Diddy, it was both too late and somehow just the beginning. His legacy, once built on hits and headlines, had transformed into a cautionary tale whispered across studios, podcasts, and boardrooms. Some said his downfall was inevitable. Others believed it was orchestrated. But deep down, everyone sensed there was more to the story. Threads still hidden, truth still buried. As the world waited for the next court date, one thing became clear. The case was no longer about one man. It was about the machinery that creates icons, protects them, and then consumes them when the spotlight turns. The tears in that courtroom had been real, but perhaps they weren't just for himself. Perhaps, in that moment, Diddy had wept for everything that fame had promised and quietly taken away. And as the cameras outside flashed once more, the story of Diddy, the rise, the fall, and the unanswered questions, was far from over. The curtain hadn't closed. It had only drawn back to reveal a darker stage, where truth and illusion looked almost identical.